Hey everybody, Robert with Rchery here. This week's video, I'm going to be going over how to set up a hinge release to keep you from punching yourself in the face, but also to be able to help you not have your float change during your shot execution. So when we look at setting up a hinge, there's a lot more than goes into it than what a lot of people think. Most people think of setting up a hinge release as just setting the speed and going out and shooting the release, and maybe they've shot an index release before, maybe they've shot a thumb release or something like that and they're transitioning over. But there's really a lot more that goes into this to be proficient at one and to give yourself the best chance of having a good experience with one as well. So you hear a lot of people talk about a hinge, and a lot of people say they don't want to punch themselves in the face, they're afraid to use them, all those types of things. And to that, I typically, I don't want to be rude about it, but if you set up a hinge correctly and you're using them correctly and you understand how they work, that should never happen. I've never punched myself in the face. I've used a hinge release almost exclusively for the last 9 years. And even when I was learning, I didn't have any issues or any problems with it. But mainly it's because I'm looking at it from a mechanical aspect, breaking it down, and what I need to do to keep myself from punching myself in the face, and also to keep myself being able to use this release the most efficient manner. All right, so the first thing we want to do is look at the hinge for what it is and attack the situation from it being a mechanical device. Hinge releases have to have rotation in order to work. There is a hook that travels across the moon, and as that hook goes across the edge, it trips and it lets the release open up and fire. Knowing that it takes rotation, the outside fingers that we use on this release, anything to this side of the release from the middle, these are going to be extremely important to not wait and put too much pressure on as we're drawing the bow back. A lot of people that punch themselves in the face, I've found, are extremely overbowed, or they just have improper form and technique when they're drawing a bow back. So you'll see a lot of people that death grip a release really hard and they start to pull back and it's rotating the release and it fires and it punches them in the face. So the main thing that we want to do when we're drawing this hinge back is we want to focus our pressures on our index and our thumb. So as we're drawing this release, we want to have the thumb wrapped around the peg, and we want to have this index finger firmly wrapped around that finger bed. If you do that and you don't make a fist or do anything crazy with these outer fingers, this release is not going to fire as you draw it back. So I can tug on it as hard as I want to right now. It's not going anywhere until I add that pressure on those outer fingers. Now, the other thing when we talk about setting up a hinge release, we want to look at our hand position. We want to make sure that our hand remains in a flat and just normal position. This is going to be the easiest to replicate from one shot to the next. We don't want a big bend in these base knuckles here along the top of our hand, because that's going to be harder to replicate from one shot to the next whenever we're drawing the bow back, whenever we go to fire. The other thing is the wrist position. This is something a lot of people overlook, but on a hinge release, this is going to change the way it feels on its speed. So when you hear people say, well, on X day I go out there and the release wants to fire too soon, and then the next day I go out and it's not firing soon enough, it just seems like it takes forever. Some of that can be some form issues, but a lot of it's going to rely on our wrist and just the positioning of it. So meaning, do we have this, the wrist here straight, or do we have it bent out to where the top of the wrist is up and our hand is down, or do we have it the opposite way where the wrist is going down and the hand is going up? If you notice when I do this, you can see it changes the rotation on this release. As I'm moving my hand, this would make it fire faster on the same setting that which you had a day prior, and this would make it fire slower than the same setting as what you had prior because of the pre-rotation that we're putting in it based on this wrist. What I would suggest, and what the best way to do to be steady as well, is that as you draw the release back and you go to anchor, we want to relax our wrist here, and that's naturally going to put it in a level position or maybe just a little bit higher up. Either one of those is going to be fine. We want to make sure that we're not dropping that wrist down and over rotating our hand around, because what that does is it adds tension here to our forearm and the back of our hand. Now the next thing I want to talk about is the natural balance of a hinge. And this is going to be coming down to how we set these up and making our hinge work for us rather than making us work for the hinge. A lot of people will set these too slow and they'll already be past the natural balance point of the hinge. In order to make that hinge fire from that point on, you have to input some type of extra rotation or a lot of extra pulling and movement when we're pulling through our shot. And we want to stay away from that. That's when you're going to be able to see people have a breakdown in their sight picture whenever they're executing versus when they're just floating on target. So, you know, if you set the release up to be slow enough to draw it back with even tension across all your fingers, that's been popular in archery talk. There's been people that'll set them up that way, and they'll get to anchor and they'll be holding good on target, but then in order to execute their shot, their sight pin or their dot will start moving around and doing something funny, and that's because this balance point has already been crossed because of the extra rotation that we're adding into it by already pre-pressuring our outer fingers, and it's just causing us to work a little bit harder than what we need to. So when we look at the natural balance point, we want to make sure that we're setting this hinge up for the shot to fire right around this point right here. This is going to be how we need this shot to fire, is when it gets to this area. That's going to be a little bit different whenever we're actually shooting and adding the weight in, wherever that's going to be. But just as a visual here, we want the shot to fire before it gets past this rotation. So if it gets past to here, there's nowhere for it to go naturally but right back up. You're actually going to have to put pressure on it to get it to fire. A couple last points here that I want to go over is the shape of the release and also how they're made. Obviously with this HBC from TrueBall, it's got a flatter finger bed right here. It's going to give us a little bit more leverage over these outer fingers. It could make it easier for you to fire your shot, and it's also going to give you a little bit more rotation that you can put into this release. Versus the TrueBall HT, this one has a more swept back third finger. It's going to be a little less aggressive on this release, but what it's also going to allow you to do is drop your hand a little bit further down on those outer fingers, and it could help you if you're an archer like myself that needs to get the shoulder and the elbow down a little bit more. This might be a better release for you. One last thing that I want to point out when we're talking about natural balances of these releases and the ease of being able to fire them, there's different ways to go about it. If you look at that HBC that we had previously, it's got a flat finger bed throughout all the fingers that allows us to get that leverage over the outside of it. The other way that we can get leverage over releases is the height of the middle finger bed compared to our index finger. So you can see that this one is quite a bit higher than that index finger, and that's going to allow us to have that leverage to be able to rotate this release through and get a smoother and cleaner shot when possibly comparing it to something like even this HT, where you can see that the middle finger bed on this release is higher than the index, but it's not quite as high as the middle finger on this Fulcrum Flex from TrueBall. All right, so let's go over setting up our hinges. I'm gonna go over two different setup processes. I'm gonna look at one with a click and the one without a click. I'm gonna give you what you need to look for and how to how to preliminary set everything up, and then also how to fine tune them later on as well. The first thing that I always do when I get a new release, I pull it out of the box and I'm gonna use a shot trainer. This shot trainer here is a Morin shot trainer. You can find them on Lancaster Archery's website. The reason I use this is because it has elastic bands here, and each one of these has been built with a different color band to replicate different holding weights. I really believe in these being a good tool to use, not only to protect yourself from hurting yourself or having anything bad happen on setting up a release, but also just when practicing your shot. I feel like the elastic bands and being able to simulate not only your back wall, but also your holding weight that you're using on your bow, it's gonna give you a more realistic shot, and it's gonna help you feel the shot and really work through it versus say just a string or some type of release aid trainer where there's no flex and there's no give and it's just stagnant. And those aren't as realistic. They'll work really well, especially if you just want to build your own to save some money on it. They'll still work really well. But I feel like if you're going to be practicing with one of these and using one of these, it's better just to have one with these elastic bands so you can really feel everything and work on pulling through the shot and moving and doing everything that you normally would when you had the bow in your hand. Again, the first thing I'm going to do is take one of these out. I'm just going to hold it in front of my face. I don't try to do anything real fancy with it yet because I just want to look at it and see how it's set up and what it's doing. And I'm going to hold all the pressure on the index to begin with, and then just start applying slowly the pressure to the outer fingers just to watch the rotation. And really the reason I'm doing this is, one, I want to see where the click is, kind of the position of where my fingers are going to be, and then also how much movement there's going to be before this release is going to fire. That's going to give me a good expectation on what to expect when I start to use this release on the speed setting. And then if I need to adjust it a little bit to begin with, then I can. Now, first thing that I'll do is, again, I'm gonna take this trainer out. I'm gonna draw it back just like I normally would, with all the pressure on my index and my thumb and just barely touching these outside fingers on the release. And I'm gonna get to full draw, and I'm gonna start working the release and going through my shot. Then I can see right here, this is where the click is, and then I can start to pull a little bit and work through my shot, and I can see this release is really, it's set too slow for me. But if we're gonna be starting with a release, too slow is generally safer than too fast. And most of the time when you get a new release out of the package, they're gonna be a little bit on the slow side. So let's talk about now setting this up. All right, so when we're using a release with a click, we wanna make sure that we're using that click correctly. We don't want the click to be a warning that the release is about to fire. We want the click to be a consistent starting position for that release, so that we know that we set up not only our hand pressure, but also our back tension, our preload, and everything correctly from the beginning. The way that I use this is I will use my string trainer here. I'll draw this back with my index and my thumb. I'll anchor, and I'll let go of that thumb, and I'll start to rotate my elbow back behind me and preload my back. And basically what I'm doing with that is I'm contracting the muscle in my back to bring my scapula over to my spine a little bit. The way I know that I'm doing this correctly each time is to study my float on target, and at my steadiest float on target, that's when I want this release to click, because that's going to show me that I am in the proper and correct spot. So if this is clicking too soon and I can't get my elbow back where I need it, or if it's taking me and really wanting to rotate my elbow around before it clicks, that means it's too slow. I'm gonna adjust this release. I'm gonna keep playing with it on my release trainer here, because this is gonna get it pretty close to what we're doing. All right, so once I've got everything preliminarily set up with my string trainer, then I am gonna take my bow out. I am not going to put up a target. I'm not going to a normal distance. All I'm gonna be doing is blank bailing on this, because I don't wanna be focusing as much on the aim as I do just making sure this hinge release is set up correctly for what I'm wanting to do. So again, I'm gonna make sure that I'm drawing the bow back with a flat hand. Pressure is gonna be on the index and the thumb. And when I get to anchor, I'm gonna see where it clicks and make sure that my setting is correct based off of the way that I had it on that more-in trainer. Now, if I draw this back with my bow and it's not quite correct, then I'm gonna adjust it. So for this one, it clicked a little bit soon for me. So what I'm gonna do is take out the tool here. I'm just gonna back it off just a little bit. You'll kind of get to be familiar with the releases as you use them, as to how much movement is, what you're getting out of it. So it'll help you as you're getting to your click and your setup. But that's what I'm gonna do. Make sure everything is set up the right way. It's before the click. And I'm gonna go through the process again. So right there is about perfect for me. So now I'm gonna go ahead and start pulling through my shot and then seeing how it fires. What I'm looking for at that point is a slow, fluid pull, and making sure that I'm not having to pull to the point to where I start to shake or pull myself off target, because then the release is set a little bit too slow. And I also want to make sure that the release isn't firing really fast, because that means it's going to be a little bit too fast. Now, even with the click release, you can adjust that window after it clicks a little bit based off when you want the shot to fire, with ledges that are different on those clicks. So a fast click versus a slow or a standard click, or also just by how you set it up. So like with this one, I moved it a little bit and slowed it down, which worked good for where I went to anchor on my, my shot and when it clicked and everything that's set up. But it was a little bit too slow when I actually went to shoot my shot. So that means that it's a little bit too slow on its setup. So what I'm gonna do, because I don't have a faster click for this release, is I'm gonna set it up a little bit faster, and I will get to my anchor and it'll click a little bit sooner, and I'll still pull to my steadiest point like I did before, and that's gonna take up a little bit of movement on that shelf before it fires. So it's gonna look like this. So see, it clicked there a little bit sooner, and I'm still rotating my elbow around to get to my steadiest point. Now when I start to pull through my shot here, it happens a lot smoother for me without me using up all my available rotation in my elbow and in my pull, and the amount of movement that allows me to get before I start shaking on target. Now, typically when it comes to using a hinge, I'm generally going to recommend an archer use a click. I like to have a consistent starting position, and I feel like for the majority of archers, this is going to give them more confidence in the release to know that with a predetermined range of motion, that release is going to fire. They don't have to worry about it just hanging up and never going, and maybe that creating some anticipation issues. And they also know that it's not just going to fire too quickly because they got too far rotation from the hinge and everything before they started their shot. But for an archer that maybe has anticipation or target panic issues pop up because they have that click, or maybe an archer that is choosing a hinge to fight their target panic, using a moon that's smooth, that has no click in it, is a good spot to start. I'm going to do the same thing with this release with no click as I did with a click. I'm going to hook the release up. I'm going to use my string trainer, hold it out in front of my face. I'm just going to start rotating the release to see the amount of rotation that's going to need before that shot fires. Once I have the preset of what I'm going to be doing based off of that, just to make sure that it's not too fast or too slow where I'm going to get in trouble with it, I'm going to go ahead and start using my string trainer. I'm going to draw it, and I'm going to come to anchor, and then I'm just going to start pulling through my shot just like I normally would, adding a little bit of pressure to that outside of that release as I'm pulling until the shot fires. And just, again, fine-tune the speed of the hinge. We want to make sure that we're consistently getting to anchor and getting to our steadiest point by preloading our back muscles and the way that we're holding that bow at full draw and kind of contracting the back like I talked about before. And then once we get that down, go ahead and bring the bow out and blank bail again and just watch on how we have it set up. Now, one thing that I'm going to do with the hinge release, the first time I draw a bow back with it, even if I've been using the string trainer and got everything down and everything feels good, I'm going to make sure that I draw it back with a little extra pressure on my index and my thumb. I don't want any accidents to happen, especially when you don't have a click to kind of warn you. But even then, if you have a click, some people will pull through that click without really getting the warning. So we want to make sure that the setup, the way that we had the speed and everything done prior, wasn't too fast because of maybe a different hand position or a different anchor, the way that we were using our release trainer. So drawing it back, a little bit more pressure than normal on the index and the thumb. I come into my anchor, and then I'm just going to start pulling through that shot and allowing the pressure to go to the outside fingers and just see how it feels. Once I've shot that first shot and I know that I'm not going to be in trouble with the amount of rotation that's built into it, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and shoot, another shot or a series of other shots here, blank bail up close, and really get comfortable with how I can weight my hand and find a consistent spot there. Now, once I've done that, then I'm going to work on setting the speed for me. So there's a few things that I'm looking for with the hinge with no click on the moon. One, I want to make sure that my shot's not happening too fast or too soon, and I just want to get comfortable with what I'm seeing on target as I'm pulling through to see if I need to adjust this down. So right now I'm pretty perfect with this, but I want to adjust it too slow really quickly, and I want to show you what that type of shot's going to look like for you to be able to avoid that happening to you. So what I've done here is I've taken the adjustment screw and I've backed it out one additional turn. It's going to make it pretty slow compared to what it was before. Without talking through this shot a whole lot, I'm just going to let you see what it would look like to begin with, and then after the shot goes off, if I can get it to go off, I'll explain and kind of work through what I was experiencing while I was shooting my shot there. All right, actually I have to catch my breath now. So basically here's what was going on. I shot my normal shot and I went through the motion of what I was doing, and one, I actually ran out of breath and I was actually breathing in as the shot fired, but ran out of breath because I just was holding way too long on target. And then also what I did too is as I'm pulling through my shot, I ran out of motion of what my back and what my arm and the allowed movement would let me do. And because of that, when you get to the end there and you just really can't move anymore, that shot's not gonna fire unless you just continually rotate and add pressure to that release. And we really necessarily don't want to do that, because you don't want to be just working on trying to aim on target and start rotating the release, because you'll almost have the same factors, you know, come into play as like with an index release or a thumb release. You'll start using that as a trigger and you can start punching at it. So we want to stay away from that. And obviously you definitely want to stay away from running your old out of shape self out of breath before that arrow fires. All right, so I've got one last scenario here to work through just to let you see what it might look like and kind of let you get an idea of what's going on. What I did is I adjusted this release faster from where the optimal setting for me is. This is gonna allow it to go off a lot sooner, and it may even go off as soon as I let off of my thumb, my thumb off of the bar there. This is gonna be something you don't wanna do, because you're not necessarily gonna be setting up for the shot. But the biggest thing here is I know a lot of archers will use this style as a way to punch a hinge release. They'll set it up really fast and that release will fire really quickly. But also what you do when you have that happen, after the first time, you know it's going to happen again. You get timid on the back end of your shot. So you're not pulling through as well. You're losing some pressure on there. You're gonna start seeing the bow want to bob down on target, and it's gonna cause you some anticipation and some target panic issues. So yeah, that one wasn't as slow as what I thought it was going to be, but it's definitely still slower, and it did fire before I fully seated myself into the release. I was actually still allowing my fingers to seat into the release before I started my pull. So again, you just get really timid on the back wall in a situation like that, and it's just not going to work as well for you. All right, so the last thing we want to talk about is fine-tuning the release and the speed of it, and really looking at the small movements on that release and the small amount of rotation on that moon in order to really dial us in on target. So there's a lot of things that come into play with this. One, you want to make sure that you're using a good timing and good rhythm with your shot that's really going to complement your body's natural aiming, rotation, and its pattern, and you're not wanting to rush through that. If you have a shot that fires too quickly, what your body's doing is it's not allowing your eye to see the pattern of the movement that your pin is doing on target. So because it can't see that pattern, your subconscious can't take over for you and help align everything up to break that shot for you. When you have a shot obviously that goes too long, you saw what happened with that prior. So we want to find that good middle ground. I've done a video on this in the past. I'm going to put a link to it here in this video so that you can watch it. I give you a first-person view looking through my scope and show you exactly how to time your shot based on your body's natural movements to allow you to hit the middle of the target as consistently as possible. With that, I'm going to leave you with a shot with a properly timed release, and the one that I'm currently using, and let you see exactly what it's going to look like start to finish. And I'm actually, this fulcrum flex that I'm using here, it's got a fast click on it, so there's not a whole lot of movement after the click. Knowing that, I want you to still take a look at how long it's going to take me to shoot my shot and see that I'm not rushing it. It's just a very smooth and fluid pulling through the shot. The fast click just allows me to not have to input much movement and pull myself off target or have anything crazy like that happen. It just makes me a little bit steadier on target, I found. There we go. Appreciate y'all watching the video today. Keep an eye out for some more. Barring what happens with Hurricane Harvey, I'm gonna try to get out as much of these as possible. I've got a couple reviews that I wanna do over a new target and this release as well as fulcrum flex, and show you how to change the moons on it without losing one of them because there's springs under it. Thank y'all again. I'll see you soon. Yeah. Caught it though, I didn't drop it. Yeah.